doesn't seem to be completely out of the question anymore to have an internal variable ND filter with mirrorless cameras. And I hope we will see it in our lifetimes, hopefully this year, next year, I don't know. It's just something that we really have been hoping for a long time, and you can see that people want that.
What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD newsroom with Nino Leitner and Johnny Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly Cinetech podcast.
Welcome to episode 72 of CineD Focus Check podcast. Now, today you're going to have to live with me alone. Johnny's off this week, but I think, I'm fine talking about stuff alone. It just might be a little bit of a shorter episode. So let's dive right in. There's a little bit of a, like a summer gap, I would say. There's not as many gear news as usual, but we still report about some quite interesting developments in the industry that probably otherwise fall under the table. Starting with, we had a bit of a provocative article title, whether the Sony FX2 is Sony's best stills body yet. Now, interesting claim by our writer Omri, because of course the FX2 is Sony's cinema camera, like it's in the cinema line. So it's very interesting to dive in why he thinks that, why he thinks it's a great stills body. We'll also talk about our new MZed course, our first visual effects course on the platform. That was really something that was missing on the platform, and we're getting started with it. And actually, it's called Get Started with Adobe After Effects by Digby Hogan, who already has 2 Premiere courses, a very, very extensive, very, very long Premiere course. I think it's 20-something hours long. And then also a beginner's course for Premiere. And this one is a beginner's course for Adobe After Effects, just kind of getting started with visual effects. If you're not a visual effects artist, so if you're an editor or just a filmmaker who needs visual effects every now and then, I'll talk about that in a bit as well. Then we have 2 announcements from DJI this week. We had the DJI Power 2000 introduced last week, a portable power station with 2000 watt hours. And just very new, fresh this week is the DJI Power 1000 version 2 that we'll also talk about. We'll talk about an article we ran about California raising film tax credits to bring back production into the state of California, which has been, experiencing a huge drop in production over the last couple of years. And we're asking whether this is too late or if it is enough to actually help with that. We'll also talk about a poll we ran last week, which is you can still take part, asking people what features are missing in today's mirrorless cameras for you. We gave you a couple of options. We also had some very, very interesting comments. We're going to dive into those, hopefully giving manufacturers some good ideas as to what they, should add to their mirrorless cameras in the future. And we'll dive into that later. I also wrote an article about a very interesting roundtable discussion, which was called CAMERAMAMAS, inside the realities of motherhood and parenting in general, but specifically motherhood as a cinematographer. And this was a roundtable discussion of, I think it was 12 female cinematographers, some of the most accomplished female cinematographers in the world. Among them, Rachel Morrison, ASC, Mandy Walker, Polly Morgan, and many, many others that took part in this panel discussion, which I really recommend you watch if you have a family and you work in our industry. It's very relevant to you in any case. We'll talk about that towards the end of this podcast. And last but not least, we're also going to talk about the fact that Sony implemented up to 35% price increases on cameras and lenses and other gear in the US amid the tariff pressures. But let's get started with the FX2 article. So basically, Omri wrote an opinion piece on whether the FX2 is the best stills body that Sony has released yet. Now, that is funny, of course, because we know that's a cinema line camera, like the FX line is cinema lines. We have originally, it started, I think, with the FX9. Then they added the FX6, which became insanely popular as a larger, I would say, mid-size body with built-in NDs. And then they added the FX3, which essentially is a cinema body version of the A7S III, because it has the same sensor, it has the same, even with the IBIS, all of that is the same. All the guts of the FX3 are identical with the A7S III, but the body is different. It had, like mounting possibilities, and it's a bit more rugged design, and it was lacking the viewfinder. And that lacking viewfinder was one thing that a lot of people complained about. And finally, recently, they introduced the FX2, which has a different sensor. It's actually the same sensor we have in the A7 IV, which also is not a new camera anymore, but it has different base ISOs and higher resolution, of course, for stills, which again makes it more interesting for stills. But the main feature, of course, which is literally sticking out, is the viewfinder. And that is the argument that Omri actually makes in this. Having this movable viewfinder means that you can also, when you shoot stills with it, you're actually able to, it's literally the first mirrorless cameras in Sony's lineup that has a viewfinder that is movable. So you can actually do low angle shots more easily, even if you take photos. Of course, that makes sense. But we hadn't had that feature in any mirrorless camera that I can think of, to be honest. Maybe some other manufacturers have it, but not Sony. But it's still quite rare in the industry in general. Most mirrorless cameras that have viewfinders, it's just, it just sticks out at the back. You cannot move it. You have the, like if you want to do low angle, you have the monitor, but still, like I'm a big fan of using a viewfinder. You have much more control over your image, especially when you're out and about and you don't have you have a lot of a bright environment. It's very hard to see the screen sometimes and just see every detail of the screen. That's why we have viewfinders. So it's nice that they bring it back. Also, he makes the argument, of course, higher resolution compared to the A7S III and FX3, but we have other stills bodies, of course, in the Alpha lineup that are specifically made for high resolution stills, whether it's the A9 Mark III or the A1 Mark II and so on. So many others that have even higher resolution sensors, of course, but they don't have the movable viewfinder, and they don't have the ability to actually mount this camera sideways, which you can do now because of the mounting brackets on the side. We see it here on this photo. You can actually mount it sideways. Actually, on the other side, you can see it. You can just mount this vertically on a tripod if you want to, which is not possible out of the box with most other cameras. You just will need to add a cage for that. So that's, makes a lot of sense. Then, of course, it also features a tough weather-sealed body, which is the case for most of the Alpha cameras as well. And but yeah, I guess the side-mounted tripod attachment, and also you have a side swiveled LCD also with others, of course, but especially the tilting and EVF makes a huge difference here. So yeah, it is a bit of a stretch, of course, to argue that this is a photo camera. But you have to see it from Omri's perspective, who's mainly a photographer. He's not so much a filmmaker. He's taking a lot of photos. And he actually argues that with many Sony cameras that he has, like the announcement of a new Sony camera, usually people are, in the past at least, with the, like kind of the third generation of the A7S and some other cameras, they were impressed with the specs at the time, like when they were announced. They were really pushing the boundaries with specs. Not so much anymore with video cameras, as we know. Because if you compare it to the latest announcements from Panasonic, the Lumix cameras, the S1 II and so on, literally have a lot more features in terms of video specs than Sony. We have open gate recording, you have internal RAW recording. None of these things are available in Sony mirrorless cameras yet, and that's why a lot of people are also disappointed with the FX2 from the video world, right? You don't have this problem in the photo world, of course. Obviously, all of those cameras shoot raw photos as well. And but he said that basically, like you have a lot of other cameras that are coming out from other manufacturers, whether it's Nikon or Panasonic and also Canon, where sometimes, like he calls it an unexplained urge to get one as soon as possible. Not so much with the Sony cameras. They are a little bit more of they are growers, not showers. If you know what I mean, they're basically not very impressive with the specs right now anymore compared to the competition. But we see from a lot of Sony users, and you have to consider and now I'm talking again about the video, like the video shooters, of course, which are our main audience on CineD, of course. A lot of people are invested in the Sony ecosystem. Actually, we should run a poll. That's actually the most obvious poll that we've never ran, now that I think about it. We should just ask people what is their main ecosystem that they work in. I would bet that the majority or the most amount of people are actually in the Sony ecosystem right now. They've done a great job at actually converting a lot of people who used to shoot on Canon DSLRs over to the E-mount ecosystem over the last couple of years. And we also I see it in my personal surrounding as a cinematographer, especially in the documentary world. So many people are on Sony cameras now, whether they want or not. You're kind of almost pushed into it because a lot of production companies already have the FX line cameras basically, and sometimes even demand for broadcast FX line cameras for production, right? So I think that's why a lot of people are even excited about this one, even though the specs they don't offer the raw video, they don't have open gate recording, but that's something that a lot of people don't actually need. They probably want it, but in a lot of everyday productions, they don't actually need it. But what's missing in everyday productions for many people who are using an FX3 is the viewfinder. So I guess I still think Sony, identified a need here. They might not have over-delivered. They just gave people what people wanted 5 years ago, finally. But it's enough for a lot of people who are already invested in the Sony ecosystem. It might not be enough for people who are not in Sony ecosystem yet to convert to Sony. So if I were to start out, I would really have a tough time deciding from, what's available in the market right now. And from the price performance aspect, I think Panasonic and Canon are currently offering a more comprehensive package in their mirrorless lineups, specifically Panasonic actually. And it's just something that, a lot of people are invested in E-mount lenses as well. So it's very hard to get out of this because it's basically the lenses that keep you tied to a system. So let's just hope that Sony also, brings up raw video and brings open gate recording to their mirrorless cameras soon. We know that new Sony cameras should be coming soon as well. So let's just hope that, these features will be addressed as well. But yeah, I recommend you read that article because it's simply from the perspective of somebody who shoots a lot of stills on why he thinks the FX2 can be considered for him Sony's best stills body yet, and what to expect here. All right, let's move on to something else. We introduced a new course to MZed just a couple of days ago. And this is the second starter course from our Australian friend Digby Hogan. Very funny guy who runs a post-production house in Melbourne. And he is great. He's really funny. It's really funny to watch his courses. Just check out the trailer if you haven't seen that yet. It's not your dry average course. It's something that really engages you. And he's telling this from the perspective of course, an editor who also knows visual effects. But, this is addressed at people who are not predominantly doing visual effects and for people who have no clue about After Effects. Now, we know a lot of people and we have lots of courses on DaVinci Resolve on MZed. That's literally the one piece of software where we have the most courses. So we know a lot of people have converted to DaVinci Resolve. However, I feel like a lot of people are using DaVinci for either grading or editing. I feel like the whole Fusion page is an entirely different topic because, of course, it's kind of an extremely powerful visual effects powerhouse that you kind of need completely different education for. And I think I find it a little bit easier to get into After Effects, to be honest. Maybe that's historically because I learned it a long time ago in film school. But I find my way around After Effects a little bit easier than I do through the Fusion page on DaVinci Resolve, to be honest. And of course, if you are in the Adobe ecosystem, if you are using Premiere, but not only then, I think getting started with After Effects will make a lot of sense. We are talking in this course, I mean, it's 1.5 hour course. It's not too long, and it's specifically addressed to beginners who have never touched it, literally. I mean, he's explaining everything of how the software is set up, of course, and he's specifically diving into 3 specific topics. One is, and he's really giving a tutorial on replacing a green screen and making a shot look convincing when you are using a green screen, which is very useful, of course. And it's never been easier than now to actually use a green screen, because software has become so good that, like in the old days, lighting for a green screen was very, very difficult. Getting rid of spill, all the fine hair stuff, all of that. Software has done a lot to kind of make this easier for us. And you don't need the perfect key anymore in order to have the perfect result. It's gotten a lot easier. Then the second topic he dives into is camera tracking, which allows you to add an element or graphics really seamlessly to a shot. And that works really, really well. The camera tracker inside After Effects is one of the best ones out there, and we've compared a few. So this is really, really cool as well. And last but not least, he's also diving into the masking tool for very quick cleanups of shots, basically. I mean, this is literally, as I said, targeted at editors who or filmmakers that are doing their own editing and just need, bit of cleanup, easy green screen work. That's what the people that this course is targeted at. And it's going to be an easy watch at 1.5 hours. It's part of the MZed Pro subscription if you're an annual or a monthly subscriber. We're also going to add an option to buy this course separately. So by the time you see this, we probably already have it up. And just check it out. It's called Get Me Started with Adobe After Effects on MZed. We'll be back after this message from our sponsor.
1 Minute Tips by Fujifilm and CineD, another part of our Film Set Roles series. Let's talk about the production sound mixer, the person responsible for capturing clean audio on set. While everyone is focused on the image, the sound mixer is monitoring microphones, setting levels, and making sure dialogue and ambient sound are crisp and clear. They often work solo or with a boom operator and manage wireless mics, mixers, and recorders, staying mostly independent from the rest of the production team. Bad audio can ruin a great image, but clean audio can save a problematic shot or take. And while they're not always heard or visible, know that their role and contribution is essential, and they are always trying to capture the best audio possible for you and the production. So remember to respect and collaborate with your sound team. They'll save your edit. Stay tuned for more film roll breakdowns. 1 Minute Tips. Until next time.
And now back to the show. Let's move on to some piece of hardware news from DJI. Now, DJI introduced actually 2 different power stations within the last 7 days, which is funny. They first introduced the DJI Power 2000, which is, a bigger unit than their original DJI Power 1000. Now, the number actually refers to the watt hours that you can get out of these things. Now, basically, it's a power station that can be charged like a huge battery, and you can charge your devices with it. So we reviewed their original DJI Power 1000 and the DJI Power Expansion 2000 unit. So basically the original one works like you have 1,000 watt hours roughly, and then you can add this expansion unit and adding another 2,000 watt hours, and then you have in total 3,000 watt hours for continuous power. You can add a lot more, actually I think up to 11,000 or something. And what happened now this week? Well, first of all, they introduced the Power 2000. Now that is not an extension unit. That is kind of, you can use that instead of the Power 1000 as the base unit. So you have kind of one crate, which is bigger and of course heavier because it has twice the amount of watt hours built in, and it's stackable, and it's just a bigger portable power station for on-set and remote use. Now, there's a couple things that are different from the original Power 1000, and most importantly, that it can deliver up to 3,000 watts of continuous output. Now, that is something, of course, that is relevant for anybody who's working with lights on the set, and you can easily hit that limit, of course, if you plug in a couple of different lights or just one powerful light. But 3,000 watts of power is a lot that you can get out of just one battery. And that is, I think the original 1,000 maxed out at 2,400 watts and just had a bit of a boost for a very short amount of time to 2,600 watts. So there's more with this one, and you can also expand it with the expandable battery units for a total of up to 22,500 watt hours, which is massive, of course. I mean, you can probably power an entire set for a full day with that. If you're on a remote shoot, if you want to do that, that's possible. It also recharges faster than the 1,000 with up to 80% in less than an hour, which is great. So if you have access to mains power, let's say over the lunch break or something, you're shooting in the woods, have 1 or 2 or 3 lights running, it drains within an hour or two, and then you can just recharge it over lunch within an hour up to 80%, which is kind of massive. So that's really, really useful. They have a couple of different fast charging cables that you can use to charge your drones. And, I think both with the 2000 and also the new Power 1000 version 2, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, you can charge drones up to, I think, 95% within 30 minutes. So, with the compatible batteries. But if you have any of the newer drones like the Mavic 4 Pro and so on, these are compatible to get it charged that quickly. There's also solar charging for both the Power, basically all of them, and you can connect for both the Power 2000 and the Power 1000 version 2, can get up to 1,800 watt of solar input, and a full charge will take around 75 minutes. I mean, that's insane. You can, I'll just show you a photo here if you watch the video version of this, of course. So basically you can connect up to 1,800 watts of solar power to charge this, to recharge it. So if you're really remote, but you have the sun, you have no means of actually charging it through the power grid, just connect a couple of their accessorized solar panels to the new power units, both the Power 2000 and the Power 1000 version 2. And both of them take up to 1,800 watts of solar input. So quite a few solar panels, I think 3 of them or something. And then it takes 75 minutes to recharge it. That's nothing. I mean, that's crazy, actually. That's not so much more than charging it through the power grid. But you need, of course, a lot of sun. I mean, a sunny day, that's definitely possible. But absolutely something to consider for remote shoots. And of course, if you also run, with power prices surging everywhere around the world, it makes sense to implement this also just to have backup, basically. It just makes sense to bring one of those units in your car as a backup, I think. Also, of course, very easy to recharge laptops and any kind of power-hungry devices. So, so check them out. Both the DJI Power 1000 version 2 and the Power 2000 are available now from DJI. The other things that are new compared to the Power 1000 with the version 2 is that you can get now 2,600 watt of stable output, whereas on the original one you only had this as a kind of a peak. So it's 200 watts more than before. This unit can be charged in 56 minutes fully or 80% in 37 minutes. And now they have an app for remote monitoring through the DJI Home app. So you can just kind of remote monitor the status of the battery. So for example, if you have it charging at home and you're on set or in the studio, you can check how is the status of that, or how much power does it actually drain right now, or how is the status of the charge, which is quite useful. They said that they improved the inverter protection and safer BMS with extended lifespan. And basically dual 140 watt USB-C ports are now there. 140 watts through USB-C is massive, of course. I mean, that means that you can literally charge your phone within no time which is also quite useful, of course, on a set. If the crew needs the phones for communication or monitoring, or as a intercom system, whatever, very easy to charge them now very quickly. So, and this system is expandable up to 11,000 watt hours. So kind of exactly half of the Power 2000 unit that was also introduced. I don't understand why they didn't introduce both of them at the same time, to be honest. But yeah, here we go. Both of these systems are available now from DJI. Good. Let's move on to a piece of news on California. Now, California raised the film tax credits. Now, we've run a couple of articles in the past about the fact that the state of California, of course, the home of Hollywood, Los Angeles, Hollywood, has been really suffering from a big drop in production over the last couple of years. If you look at this graph here that we found, it's been brutal. I mean, literally, there were like 450,000 jobs in the industry in total, actually, in the US in 2020. And then there was a massive drop around COVID to 200,000 jobs. And then it went back up again. But you can see in the graph that it kind of struggles to come back to where it was. In California alone, I think at the peak we saw around 160,000 jobs in the film and television industry. And now we're down to 100,000, I would say, if you look at that graph. So the numbers actually say that California's share of motion picture and sound recording jobs dropped from 42.4% in 22 to 26.7% in May 2024, and now are just slightly above the lows we saw during the pandemic. So it's really brutal. I think we all know people who are suffering from this in Los Angeles. I know personally quite a few people who've moved away or actually changed industry, unfortunately. And of course, it's a number of things. I mean, we had the streaming wars between the big streaming giants that had basically peak production around 2020, and then with the pandemic, and then later with the strikes, it was the perfect excuse for them to kind of reduce production and also offset production to more other locations. Now, of course, technology has made it much easier to produce elsewhere. I think the accessibility of crews and better education around film jobs and more people in the industry in general made it possible for film production studios and streamers to produce all around the world. And also, of course, a big reason is that they offered bigger tax incentives. So basically, the way the system works all around the world now in a lot of places is that if a production spends, the majority of their money for a film within one country, they will get back a percentage of that from that government, from that state or country, because the country basically says, or the state says that, well, you have all those crew and cast people that are, need hotels, infrastructure, anything, spending a lot of money there. Even if we give them back, let's say 25% of the money that they spend there, it's still going to be a net positive for us, because otherwise we won't have that production. Because of course, production, unless it's really location-based, anything that's studio-based or not really reliant on a specific location can be shot anywhere. And even if it is reliant on a specific location, we've seen films that are, set in Los Angeles that were shot in Canada for that reason, which is crazy, but that's how it is. And it's kind of created a competition between governments, like country and state governments within the US, but also countries around the world. And we've seen it here in Austria as well. We had this big thing where, like 25% tax credit for international productions. And it's happening everywhere. And it's just within the US, we saw a lot of production move to Georgia. We've seen other places, North Carolina, and away from California, which of course is the state with probably the highest or one of the highest cost of living and very high, like very strong unions in our industry, which means that makes production more expensive for the streamers and the studios. So now we have a tax credit that is up to 35% in Los Angeles now, I think. And there's a couple of other bills or another bill that is up for a vote, which would also expand which kind of productions would qualify, including animated films, shorts, and so on. And basically, they're trying to get production back through that. I think it's a little bit late, but I think it's a first late step in the right direction, but it's probably going to take a lot more in order to kind of prevent an exodus of productions from Los Angeles, unfortunately. I think the cost of living and everything that's happened around the wildfires and the strikes over the last couple of years have made life really tough for people from the industry there. And I think it's going to take more than just this tax credit. But here's hoping that they will, get back on their feet with production. It's probably never going to be what it was around these boom times around 2020, 2019. But let's hope it's coming to a very stable level. And we are seeing some signs internationally, at least, that production is kind of stabilizing again after the strikes. Slowly, it's extremely slow, but it seems to be happening. And let's see. I mean, I think next week we'll probably run an interview that I don't want to tease too much yet, but it's with somebody who works on big movies, and we've seen a couple of summer blockbusters that are actually doing quite well at the box office. And it's not the blockbusters that are going to save Hollywood, but I think it's a sign that people still want to go to the theaters, want to go to cinema and see movies on the big screen, which gives me hope that, production will just increase again and people will get a taster of the fact that it's actually nicer to see a movie on the big screen than just, watch endless kind of versions of the same thing on streaming platforms. Not to say that there isn't good streaming content, but you know what I mean. It's basically we want high quality stuff, and ideally, as filmmakers, we want to see our stuff on the big screen. So, here's a little bit of hope for Los Angeles and California to get productions back to normal, I would say. All right, let's move on to a poll that we ran a week ago, which is still going strong, actually. And that is, what features are missing from today's mirrorless cameras? And that is an interesting question, of course, because, we've had mirrorless cameras since, 10, 12 years now, after DSLRs kind of, stopped being the major compact camera in our field. And we gave you a couple of options. First of all, we asked, do you want an internal variable ND filter? Do you want built-in mini XLR inputs? Do you want internal recording memory? Just like the Sigma BF actually has, and some DJI drones in every camera. Do you want a built-in espresso machine? It's a bit of a joke, of course. A rotatable hand grip, interchangeable sensors, or is your camera perfect just the way it is? Now, the overwhelming majority, and of course multiple votes were possible, actually selected internal variable ND filters. 60%, over 60% would want to see a internal variable ND filter. Now, this is something that we've been asking manufacturers for such a long time. And because it's actually the last main differentiating factor between mirrorless cameras and whatever is called cinema camera, box style camera from various manufacturers, because those usually have ND filters built in. Now, what we have been told in the past was that you cannot combine IBIS with a built-in ND filter, which they often said is the reason why there isn't one. And also it would make the mirrorless body bigger. Now, the thing, we have IBIS. The first camera that actually has IBIS and a built-in ND filter is the Sony Burano, which of course is not a mirrorless camera, but they proved that it can be done. So let's just hope that Sony or other manufacturers will actually bring that technology also to their smaller cameras. Now, we know that it also needs always a mechanical kind of functionality to move that ND filter in front of the sensor. to the best of our knowledge, it's not possible to have a clear ND filter, like a variable ND filter that goes from clear to whatever 6-7 stops. It always has to be moved in, and like you usually start with a quarter or something like that, and then like for example, even if you have a camera like a Sony FX6 or FX9 that has a variable ND filter, it kind of, when you enable it, it physically still moves a filter on top of the sensor, and then that is the variable ND filter that can change its intensity. But there needs to be this physical mechanical movement, which means this needs space within the body. So, because if you didn't need that, you could just have the filter in front of the sensor at all times, which of course would mean that you could have a very, very small camera, but it's not possible. So you need to move in the filter, and then it can change the intensity. We have companies like LC Tech that have the same kind of technology and are licensing it to now manufacturers of mounts like Metabones and so on. So here's hoping that also other camera manufacturers on top of Sony will have variable ND filters in the future and license it probably from LC Tech, which works similarly to the Sony solution but is a different patent. We talked about this before. But basically, it doesn't seem to be completely out of the question anymore to have an internal variable ND filter with mirrorless cameras. And I hope we will see it in our lifetimes, hopefully this year, next year, I don't know. It's just something that we really have been hoping for a long time, and you can see that people want that. So that looks like it would be something that people, would upgrade their systems for if one of the manufacturers manages to do that. In my opinion, like I wouldn't mind if the camera was a little bit taller, because that, like there might be this mechanical limitation. So for example, if you look at cameras that have a battery grip or just the bigger bodies, like the high-end photo models of mirrorless cameras, very often have this shape anyway. And if they can make it happen with a shape like that, even if it's a taller body, I think it would be fine, as long as it's not very deep. So basically what Canon has with the C80, maybe a little bit smaller, but that camera has an ND filter. Of course, it's fixed NDs, but you could make this a little bit smaller and then kind of make a mirrorless out of this, and hopefully add a viewfinder. And then, of course, we would have internal variable NDs. I mean, even if it's NDs, even if they're not variable, I'd be happy. But, ideally variable NDs. Good. Built-in XLR inputs, that mini XLRs, that's something that also like around 13-14% voted for. So not a huge thing, but people would want to see it. And also the next one up would be the 43 people or 7% voted for the internal recording memory as a backup. I think it would be nice just to have this not as a main recording media, of course, but we've all been there, showed up somewhere or ready to shoot and then realizing, well, either the card is full or you don't have a card inside. It happens all the time. DJI recognized this with the drones, because it happened to me. With a drone, it's particularly annoying when you took off and then only in the air you realize, oh, I don't have a recording media inside, which can happen, like in the heat of a production where you just, quickly shoot, grabbing a couple of shots with your camera. Then you want to get your quick drone shot that you need and you just forget to put in an SD card. Now, all the recent DJI drones actually have some kind of built-in internal memory, which is very, very useful sometimes. And even though it means you have to physically connect the drone afterwards to offload footage, they could do, like camera manufacturers could do the same with cameras, and it wouldn't add a lot of cost because memory is not that expensive, and it doesn't have to be that much of memory, right? It could just be something that is a backup that gives you, let's say, half an hour of one of the better codecs built into the camera of recording time. That would be very useful in my opinion. But let's dive into the comments here, because a lot of people also had great comments and ideas of what else should be, what other features future mirrorless cameras should have. Now, somebody mentioned thermoelectric cooling, because you can buy aftermarket external units for very little money already. Why not integrate them? Sure, they need a lot of power, but you can let the user decide about the compromise. Now, this is, of course, referring to the fact that a lot of mirrorless cameras, when you are recording in the best resolution codec possible, very often RAW, 4K, or even 6K, 8K, the cameras will overheat. And yeah, it makes sense for me. I mean, of course, adding thermoelectric cooling would mean it would just make the body bigger. And at some point, you don't have a mirrorless camera anymore. The question is, what is a mirrorless camera, right? I think there is nothing, like I mentioned before with the ND filters, I think it's okay if it's a little bit bigger. You still have the smaller cameras available anyway. So it kind of, like I'm keep coming back to the C70, C80 form factor from Canon. It's funny that most of the other manufacturers don't have something in that kind of size, even though it would be quite useful. And then you could have something like that, I think. Andrew is mentioning that plenty of stuff is missing for him too. For example, shutter angle. So yeah, that's a good point. Of course, a lot of the mirrorless cameras still don't have shutter angle. Now, why is shutter angle important? Well, basically, when you're shooting video, you're trying to keep the shutter at the same speed most of the times in order to have this same characteristic of motion. It's the typical 180-degree shutter rule. That is something, like if you keep that the same, even if you shoot slow motion or different frame rates, the characteristic of the movement will remain the same. Now, a lot of the mirrorless cameras only have fractions of a second. So, for example, if I'm shooting 25p and I will shoot a 50th of a second, but once I change to 100 frames per second, I will have to adjust that to a 200th of a second. And if I forget doing that, I might actually have a different kind of motion impression because the exposure of every image will be different and it will not flow as nicely as it did with the 50th of a second exposure. Now, that is a problem. Of course, if I have shutter angle, it doesn't matter. I can change the frame rate. It will always be the same shutter angle, so it will always look the same. The characteristic of the motion will be the same, and that's why you typically on a cinema camera you choose to set it via shutter angle and not fractions of a second. For some reason, this is still something that we have to beg many manufacturers for, and it's not built into every one of the cameras. So I agree. He also mentions a proper dedicated EVF with proper mounting arm with a heated eye cup and telescopic extension blocks. Wow, that's kind of really going out there. I'm not sure about the heated eye cup. It would be nice, but I guess, battery life and so on. But yeah, I agree about proper dedicated EVF with proper mounting arm. And that, leads me back to the FX2 article that we mentioned at the beginning of this podcast. Yeah, just a tilting EVF would be nice. Why not? I mean, this can be done. It should be done. And basic menu system that has just, basics with frames per second, shutter angle, ISO, white balance, and nothing else. That's a good point. That's what we have in an ARRI camera, and everybody loves the menu of an ARRI Alexa because it's simple and you have everything you need at a glance. We have versions of this sometimes from some of the manufacturers. There is this specific display that you are getting now. I think Fujifilm is announcing something like that for the GFX Eterna. We also have this on Sony cameras with this, I think they call it the Big Six menu on the FX2, but also, we know it on the Burano and the Venice and so on. So they are getting this message, but I agree, this should be the default menu for shooting video, and why not put this in everywhere? I don't like these endless scrolling menus where, literally always setting the same things and looking for the same things in the same sub menu. Why not put them together? I agree. Built-in power output for accessories, yes, but the problem with mirrorless cameras, of course, they use small batteries, so I'm not sure how much sense that makes because it would just drain the battery quicker, but to have the options, I guess, would be nice. Built-in V-Lock battery block high power system, not some kind of third-party battery holder. Well, yes, but I think that's a problem with the form factor of a mirrorless system because you usually have the screen at the back and also the viewfinder. Where would you put the EVF? Where would you put the V-mount? So you don't want to have it below. let's see. That's basically something I can't see on a regular basis. So USB hub supports simultaneous power, disk, like recording out, signal out, HDMI out, 32-bit float audio. That's a good one. That's definitely something we missed in the options here. 32-bit float audio built into the mirrorless camera. Why not? We should have that. Whether you use a mini jack or an XLR adapter, you should have the ability to record 32-bit float audio inside a camera. I would also even add to that, why not actually have a universal receiver for all those Wi-Fi based audio transmitters? Why not, right? You have might be kind of an antenna issue, I don't know. But if it's possible, imagine you have a universal receiver where you can receive something from a Rode or a Saramonic or a DJI or Holyland transmitter and get the audio signal for up to 2 channels directly into the camera without actually using a dedicated receiver. That would be so useful. But yeah, 32-bit float audio recording, of course. And I like the USB hub support. Now basically, I think what we need is display port video, right? So basically, I think only Blackmagic Design and very few others have display port through USB to use a viewfinder with the USB port. Just get an image out of the USB-C port without kind of blocking your HDMI. So that would still leave you the HDMI for an additional monitor or wireless video transmitter, for example. And that would allow you attaching a proper EVF like the Blackmagic EVF that works through USB-C, connecting that to the camera. So that'd be great. I absolutely agree. And then, of course, you would need a splitter. That's the problem, right? Because you don't want to have several USB-C ports. I mean, you could have several USB-C ports on your camera. It's just a matter of space and also power, of course. But because if you want to record onto an SSD externally, which, by the way, is also something that not every mirrorless camera can do. That should be absolutely standard. Have the ability to use, especially for cameras that are capable of recording raw video and thereby, need a lot of space. You kind of should always have the ability to record that video externally onto an SSD. But yeah, if you want to use that also for, display port out, you would have to have something like a USB hub to split that signal, if it's even possible. So yeah, internal open gate, yes. I mean, yeah, we want that in every camera. I don't understand why. I mean, with the prevalence of anamorphic shooting with very affordable anamorphic lenses that we report about and review quite a lot, I think, and people just love, we should have the ability to have open gate recording with every camera. I don't think there's any reason. The processing inside that is available now would allow it. Good. Computational photography. Now that's a good one. I think that's something that's really neglected. I think I think we've talked about this before too. I think smartphones are really eating every camera's lunch right now. We know that, right? I mean, if you even as a professional cinematographer, photographer, just look what happens on a set. You literally take behind the scenes stills with your phone. You don't use the proper camera that you have, even if it's not in use, simply because it's much easier to deal with the footage, the photos that you take on the phone than it is on a camera, right? You kind of process. You use it for production, the camera, and then it needs to go through the editing process and so on. Like even if you take some stills, you need to think about it afterwards that you took some BTS stills on a camera, and it's complicated. There is still an issue. It's two things. There's still an issue of transferring footage and photos of a mirrorless camera onto a phone where you can immediately send them to somebody or process them, versus doing it directly. And the other issue is, of course, computational photography and cinematography, which is now also possible in the smartphones. Now, the first one, of course, they're trying to solve with all those apps that are available to transfer footage and photos of your camera onto your smartphone. Now, there is still a bit of an issue here because you need to manually kind of initiate it, right? The easiest would be, let's say you have a setting on your camera which says smartphone sync on, and you just set it on, and the second you set that on, you will automatically have at least the photos, ideally also compressed versions of the video, immediately in the background kind of synced to your smartphone, not the cloud. I mean, the cloud is nice. Like we have camera to cloud, which is also a feature, of course, that, is nice to have, but it's really targeted at high-end professional workflows. Whereas in practical workflows, you probably just want everything you shoot directly on your smartphone without even thinking about syncing it and sending it over. So building a feature into those cameras that automatically syncs it when you want it would be so nice. Like even before you shoot, like you set it on, then you shoot, and then you can just imagine having whatever. A lot of people are shooting Instagram reels for brands now, and it still involves a process of using a proper camera, then kind of getting the card, sticking it into a computer, blah, blah, blah. The faster workflow is, of course, camera to cloud. But what if you have the producer client on set with a smartphone? We all know those marketing people working for the companies that hire us, right? That are constantly on their smartphone, posting stories and stuff about the brands that we are documenting, kind of making stories for, whatever, reels for. Imagine they would have whatever you shoot on their smartphones instantly the second you press stop, or even while you're shooting. Why not? Why is that a thing? Why is that something I need to even mention? That should be a standard. And the second thing, and that is what Rodney mentioned here in the comments, computational photography and cinematography. Now, we have a lot of capabilities in smartphones now to enhance photos. Of course, we have multiple exposure images automatically made into HDR photos, beautiful HDR photos. That is something you need to do a lot of steps to achieve the same thing with a professional camera still, right? If you look at an HDR photo on an iPhone, for example, it looks amazing, which was shot directly on an iPhone. Even video, HDR video, you upload this as a reel, whatever, to Instagram, it displays. If you have a HDR capable iPhone, it will display as HDR content in your Instagram story. Try the same thing with, something from a camera. It will take quite a bit of processing to get to the same kind of brilliance, of course, with the other advantages of having a better sensor. But it's going to be very difficult to get HDR video from a camera onto a phone. It's just taking a lot more time. And also, in general, the computational depth of field, for example. I mean, this is something that is built into smartphones now, and it's getting better with every generation, where you have suddenly the ability to have a shallow depth of field from a tiny, tiny sensor that looks more and more convincing. Now, yes, it does have its issues, but with every generation, it's going to be harder to tell whether something was taken on a proper large sensor camera or a smartphone. Now, why not learn from those guys and take some of the software ideas and put them into a mirrorless camera? For example, why not have an ability to add more shallow depth of field, kind of make it even shallower. Let's say you have only an f4 lens, like a zoom lens on your camera, which limits the, of course, shallow depth of field that you can achieve with your camera, and then have the ability within the camera to process the footage and add, or photos, and add more shallow depth of field to that. We have that ability in Adobe Lightroom, which works perfectly well. We actually use it when we're shooting trade show videos. The most difficult thing is to get a proper featured image for a trade show video about a specific product, because trade shows are messy. There's a lot of weird different lights. There's a lot of stuff in the background, people, other gear that you don't want to see if you talk about one product. What we do is we take a nice photo with a proper camera of a product, and then we process it in Lightroom. And in Lightroom, there's the capability of actually adding more shallow depth of field, just kind of have this lens blur. And through a depth map, it will know exactly what's in focus, of course. So everything that's already out of focus can be more out of focus. And you will not notice the difference if we add a bit more shallow depth of field. Now, if that is possible, let's say in your mirrorless camera, also for video, just to enhance that shallow depth of field, that would be very, very useful. That's just one example for computational photography. Or in general, why not have a mini version of a color grading / Lightroom type software built into your camera, so you can share directly from the camera, maybe even to social platforms from the camera without going through your phone. Just an idea here. I think in terms of software, specifically the Japanese manufacturers still need to really catch up. I think they've recognized this over the last couple of years, which we've seen since the pandemic. There's proper webcam apps for every camera now, but it's not enough. They need to really learn software better, I think, in order to add more features here. And that's, I think, could be the main differentiating factor. We see some steps into this direction, but not enough yet. Good. That was a long kind of excursion, but I think software is a main thing that kind of needs to be enhanced. Yes, some more comments here. We, of course, somebody mentioned a different aspect ratio sensor, 4x3 or 5x4 sensors to shoot both horizontally and vertically without sacrificing too much of the latter. Now that is smart. Of course, with so much vertical content now also produced for video, we proposed the idea once to have a turnable sensor that can be turned like 90 degrees, because we all know the problems of actually mounting a camera vertically creates all kinds of problems where you have the menu suddenly to the side. So actually, the camera manufacturers could program the menu that it automatically adjusts like all the overlays on the screen to vertical shooting. Or, and that would be better ergonomically, you have a turnable sensor, so you could still hold the camera horizontally, but you would turn the sensor and then have a vertical image. We talked about that before, Johnny and I. Well, ideally, you have a square sensor, right? You have a sensor that kind of gives you the same quality no matter whether you're shooting horizontally or vertically, and you just choose what you want, either in post or already while you're shooting, ideally while you're shooting. I guess you would have a raw image that kind of caches the bits you don't want to see, like you do when you shoot a raw image in 16:9. You still have the 3:2 raw photo, of course. You could do the same for a square image, of course, and that is a good idea. I think it's something that's a true hybrid camera, because it wouldn't matter. You wouldn't have to hold the camera vertically to shoot vertical video, and that's quite useful, of course. Faster readout sensors. Well, yes, and that's something in general. I think enhancing what we have is always good. 12-bit log H.265 files with selectable bit depth and noise reduction. Yes, same thing. Better quality codecs, but compressed. Yes. I think a lot of people want ProRes and that kind of stuff inside their cameras. Now, the thing is, ProRes is kind of a dated, I would say it's a very efficient, it's a very useful codec for editing, but it's not very efficient. It's quite big data file sizes. If you have more modern codecs that require more processing, like H.265, of course, you could put 12-bit into H.265. I don't know if it's defined within the standard, but I think technically it's possible. And then you would have a very high quality compressed codec, which would give you a lot of quality in a relatively small file size. That's a good idea. Good. Some other ideas included HDR specs. Yeah, HDR monitor. That is a good one. We still don't have proper, or everybody's just talking about the OLED viewfinder if you have a high resolution viewfinder and so on. But generally the screen at the back is not very high quality. We have 3000 nit OLED screens on phones, Pablo says correctly, but we don't have them on cameras. Why don't we have that? That is a very good point. Especially on cameras that don't have viewfinders, we need brighter screens and we need HDR capable screens. We have them on external monitors. I think it's probably down to the fact that those flippable screens are very thin. I'm just guessing here, and probably cannot be as bright if they are that thin. But again, it should be technically possible, then make them a little bit thicker but brighter. But it's something that no manufacturer seems to think about. I would love to see a 5 to 7 inch monitor with touch camera control as seamless as using the onboard LCD screen. Okay, well, built-in very large screen maybe. That depends on the camera size, of course. Yes, internal wireless audio and 32-bit float keeps coming up. Good points. And triple ISO. Yes, triple ISO that goes lower, like ISO 50. We have a triple ISO camera, or several actually, from Canon. So I wonder if at some point we can have cameras that only have native ISOs. Like even if it's 5 different one of them, and then you just don't need anything else anymore, because all of them will be relatively clean. That would be nice. But yes, a lower base ISO would sometimes be also very useful, because then it would sometimes just, you wouldn't need to use ND filters outside, of course. And a high quality internal timecode clock. Good idea. Timecode syncing built into the camera. Now that actually, let's wrap it up here, because that's a good segue into the next topic. So that was the poll. What features are missing from today's mirrorless cameras? And that leads me to a piece of news which is related to timecode. Now, Saramonic just introduced the TC-Neo timecode generator. Now, if you know timecode generators and use them on set, you're probably familiar with Tentacle Sync, and you're also probably familiar with Ambient and their Lock-It devices. Now, Ambient was there first, then Tentacle came along, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, with their really, really tiny timecode generators that really very quickly became a standard in the industry. Very nice guys who founded this company, German company from Cologne. I think I've told this story before, when they approached us before they actually got started. And I'm so happy for them that this product became so successful. And like literally everybody knows Tentacle Sync, Sync-Ease, right? They're very, very small timecode generators. You can jam sync a lot of different cameras and recorders very easily with them using an app. They only have a little LED that is blinking, and using the app, you can just easily connect them all. I think for 24 hours or so, they are very frame accurate, very easy ways, and kind of affordable, I think. Now, they also came out with a Track E, which is kind of like a 32-bit float recorder that has this technology built in. And then we've seen some competitors like DJI, which is an off-brand from Aperture, also come out with timecode generators. And of course, Ambient also introduced the Nano Lock-It, which is kind of competing with the Tentacle Sync-E, to have a very small timecode generator also for ambient devices, which used to be very, very large devices. Now, we have another player enter this game, and it's Saramonic. Now, Saramonic, interestingly, over the last year or so, they've released a lot of very, very interesting products. I mean, we reported about their K9 audio system, which seems to be really, really impressive. We're actually planning on reviewing that, because it's a very high-end 32-bit float-based wireless audio system that is very high-end. It seems to be very high-end, and is competing with high-end solutions in the field. And we reported about that around NAB time. I guess we can put the link in the show notes to that video. And now they also announced a timecode generator, that the TC-Neo, that works with the K9 directly. So it is a little timecode box like the Sync-E from Tentacle Sync, but immediately what sticks out is the fact that it has an OLED screen on top of it. And of course, it can display information about the timecode itself, of course, battery life, all kinds of things can be displayed on this little OLED screen, which, because it's OLED, of course, will probably not take a lot of power. So that, of course, the question remains, how long can this thing kind of be powered without having to recharge it? But I'm confident that it's quite a while, because it's an OLED screen. It will tell you information of whether it's synced or not, and all that kind of things that through a CineD, you will have to go through the app actually if you can't get this information from the blinking LED. And the cool thing is it integrates neatly with the K9 system. So you already have that built in. So you will already have in the recording unit, of course, you will not have to use a separate one of the TC-Neos to have timecode sync with that system, which is nice. There's also app integration, of course. And that's a new thing for this for this kind of niche of the industry, I would say. It's a charging case. And the charging case is very similar to what we know from the wireless transmitters that we usually, the Wi-Fi based wireless transmitters from DJI, Rode, and so on, that all have this charging box now that kind of recharges them at least one time if they're drained. And now you have that for the timecode generators as well, which is of course very useful. Now this box houses 3 of them and has multiple syncing options. It works through Bluetooth, and if Bluetooth isn't available, the units can pair directly over 2.4 gigahertz wireless, which of course is useful in environments where, for example, phones are not allowed, or the battery life is limited. And wired jam sync is also supported via a 3.5 millimeter input from an external source, which is also a huge advantage, of course. But you have that wired syncing, of course, also with the sync keys, for example. And and there's 3 operational modes: master run, auto jam, and jam once and lock. And that gives users control over how the time code is maintained throughout the day. And there's also up to 8 user selectable sync groups, which is of course helpful if you work in different teams, so you don't always have to reset all the functions, so you can just kind of go back and forth between productions. As a sound guy, especially useful, of course. SIMT 12M timecode is supported or is output from the TC-Neo, and it's either linear LTC or audio timecode, which is of course compatible with most cameras and recorders. So very nice solution here. It's quite well thought out. 22 hours of battery life, which is, like what I mentioned in the beginning, quite good actually, with a built-in battery. And there's a lot of accessories to it also. They are priced, a single unit is $150, and it's $500 for the 3-pack unit, including the charging case. Now, that's competitive. Like if you compare that to what Tentacle Sync charges for the sync keys, that's a very, very competitive price. So it's going to be interesting to check them out. They're called Saramonic TC-Neo and should be available soon. Good. So 2 more pieces of news or things we want to talk about. Now, I wrote an article about a very interesting roundtable discussion that happened I think 1 or 2 weeks ago. Now, Natasha Breyer ASC, who runs a platform called Deep Light, which is kind of a interactive platform to connect cinematographers with each other, she ran a roundtable discussion called CAMERAMAMAS, and she invited a lot of very successful women from our industry, cinematographers, to that roundtable discussion to talk about something that's really, really neglected in our industry, of how to be actually a parent when you work on production. And especially for mothers, I mean, it must be extremely hard. As a father of 2, I know how hard it is to actually balance private life with production life, because of course the schedules of your kids kind of are rigid, right? There's kind of the same rhythm to it. And production is never rigid, right? It's different. I mean, it's long hours, it's a lot of traveling, being abroad, being away from the family, which makes life difficult enough, right? And very often you need, like I do, have a very supportive partner who helps you with that. But it is difficult. It's difficult for families. And it must be especially difficult for mothers. And these women talk about in a over 2-hour conversation about their experiences as being mothers and having a family while still having a very successful cinematography career. I can only recommend you, not only if you're a mother but also as a father, if you have kids and work in our industry, watch this talk and read that article because it's very, very insightful. They talk about a lot of things that, like everybody kind of tries to figure out by themselves. We all know it's very hard and to balance everything. And it's just nice to hear from people who are as successful as these women who really are at the top of their game. I mean, we're talking about people like Mandy Walker, ASC, ACS. We're talking about Rachel Morrison. We have also Polly Morgan. We have Reed Morano, many others as part of this discussion, Ari Wegner, who know what they're talking about, right? And it's just very interesting to hear the different experiences that they've had. Not only how hard it is to balance everything, but they were actually operating as camera women, cinematographers while pregnant, which is insane. I mean, we have very, very strict workers' protections here in Austria when it comes around, pregnancy and so on. But in the US, that's not the case. Like they only get a couple weeks off if they're lucky. And some of these women were operating, like in I don't know, 9 months pregnant. What it looks like, it's insane. And just how they are balancing, motherhood with leadership, artistry, everything that it takes to run a set as a cinematographer. It's insane. Yeah, just give it it's very personal. It's a very insightful video, and just check that out if you have the time. It's a nice gap filler I just wanted, I spent quite a bit of time writing this because I just find it's a very, very important subject, even though it's very far from our usual gear reporting. I think balancing parenthood with production is difficult, and those who have a family know what I'm talking about. So check that out. Even if you're a man and if you're a woman, just give this a watch. It's very, very insightful. All right, let's round off this week with our last piece of news, and that is Sony implementing an up to 35% price increase on cameras and lenses in the US amid tariff pressures. Now, we're talking a lot to all kinds of manufacturers, of course, every day, and also about upcoming products. And what we've already seen since NAB in April is that a lot of companies are very unsure as what to charge in the US for their products. And we've seen this around NAB already because there was just simply uncertainty what's going to happen with the tariffs. There's always this looming kind of threat of higher tariffs coming, and then there's this base tariff that most countries have to pay now if they're importing stuff into the US. So actually, of course, it's the consumers paying that. And it just means that everybody's very confused as what they are able to charge and what they can charge, what they have to charge in order to still, not make lose money basically when they sell stuff in the US. And Sony just for the second time actually took a bit of a more drastic step and increased prices up to 35% on all their products, and especially cameras and lenses. Now in May we already saw increases for a lot of products, but a lot of non-camera products were affected, just a few cameras, and now it's basically affecting the entire lineup. I mean, you see everything increase in price. Yeah, what can I say? I hope that they figure things out and things come back to normal for our already embattled industry. I think it's not easy right now to be a manufacturer and, try to trade in the US, which of course they want to have to because it's the biggest market in the world. But it's very, very difficult. And I think, let's just hope this gets figured out soon. And there will be some certainty for manufacturers as to what to charge. But right now it looks like it might pay off for Americans to travel abroad unless they look at the US dollar, which has suffered around 10% since the beginning of the year. So yeah, but if you go to some countries, I guess it will still make sense to, if you want to buy a camera, to just bring it in. You will still have to pay customs though, to be honest. But yeah. Anyway, so that's it. That's it for this week. And thanks for watching. Let's connect again next week. I think we're going to have a special episode. It's a bit too early to announce that, but it's going to be interesting. And thanks everybody for watching. Stay tuned to CineD Focus Check. And don't forget to give us a like on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you consume your podcast. Leave a comment, write us an email, podcast@cined.com. And yeah, see you on the next one. Bye.